The first time I saw her lips on his, I swore I'd never forgive either of them. It happened so quickly I almost convinced myself I imagined it, a whisper of a kiss, half hidden by the crowd, her face angled away from mine, his hand lingering at her waist as if he owned her. But the mark it left on me was permanent, etched like acid into the back of my eyes. That night, my brother hosted one of his lavish parties. He called them casual gatherings, but nothing about them was casual. His penthouse glittered like something out of a magazine, glass walls reflecting the city lights, champagne towers, and people who laughed with the kind of confidence only money could buy. I never fit in at those parties. I was a visitor in their world, a curiosity. A middle-class professional in second-hand shoes, forever the kid who grew up envying his brother's toys, his clothes, his charm. But she was the reason I went. When she leaned against me, fingers curled lightly on my arm, I told myself she belonged to me. That I had won something my brother could never take away. She looked stunning that night, her red dress cutting like a wound against the monochrome black suits around her. Every man stared. But her smile was mine. Or so I thought. Then I caught the way he looked at her. That same lazy grin he used on waitresses, teachers, even girlfriends I brought home in high school. A grin that said, "You'll choose me eventually." They always do. I told myself I was being paranoid. But paranoia has a way of sharpening your senses. I remember holding a wine glass, watching the crimson stain her lipstick left on the rim. She teased me for not drinking fast enough, took the glass from my hand, sipped, and pressed it back to me with a wink. For a moment, it felt intimate. Ours. Until I saw my brother watching, smirk tugging at his lips, like the glass was just another thing he'd take from me when he felt like it. Later, as the crowd thinned, I slipped into the hallway for air. That's when I heard him. My brother's voice, carrying low but clear through the cracked door of his office. "She's with me now," he said, laughter curling around the words. "My little brother. He's harmless. The lesser one. Always has been, always will be. The lesser one." I stood frozen, every childhood memory collapsing into that phrase. The way our parents praised his grades while ignoring mine. The way girls laughed harder at his jokes. The teacher said, "Why can't you be more like your brother?" It was all condensed into that smug declaration. My fists clenched so tight I thought the wine glass might shatter inside my palm. I wanted to burst in, scream, hit him, something. But I didn't. I swallowed it, like I'd swallowed every insult before. The anger didn't fade. It calcified. When I returned to the living room, I found her phone on the counter, screen lit with a new message. I shouldn't have looked. I know that. But instinct is stronger than morals when suspicion's gnawing at you. One line glared back at me in bright white text against the black screen. "Meet me after dinner. Don't let him find out." I was born into a house where shadows grew taller than children. My brother's shadow, specifically. He was older by 3 years, but it might as well have been a lifetime. From the moment he could walk, people seemed to orbit him. Teachers adored him, neighbors praised him, coaches made excuses for him when he skipped practice but still started every game. He had this natural confidence, like the world had already promised itself to him, and he just had to show up and collect. I didn't inherit that gift. I was the quiet one, the good one. My parents never said it out loud, but I knew. He was the star, and I was the filler. Family portraits told the story best. He stood tall in the middle, grin wide, eyes full of spark. I stood off to the side, leaning into the frame, my smile tight, like I was begging the camera to notice me. The mirror was my enemy. Every morning, I stared into it and measured myself against him, his jawline sharper, his hair thicker, his shoulders broader. Even as adults, nothing changed. I would straighten my tie before work and wonder how he made the same gesture look like confidence while mine looked like desperation. The mirror never lied. It always told me I was second place. That's why when she looked at me, really looked at me, I thought maybe the mirror was wrong. I met her at a client dinner. She was working the event, not attending, which made her even more radiant to me. She wasn't born into money like the people she served drinks to. She was like me, someone who had to step carefully around the edges of a gilded room, hoping not to leave scuff marks. We talked while she refilled my glass. I cracked some self-deprecating joke, and instead of the polite smile I expected, she laughed. A real laugh. For the first time, I felt chosen. With her, I imagined escape. Not just from the grind of my job or the small apartment I rented, but from the constant weight of being lesser. She was beautiful in a way that demanded attention, yet she gave hers to me. When she touched my arm, it was deliberate, like she wanted me there. She called me clever, said my eyes were kind, said she liked how I saw the world differently. I let myself believe every word. But there were signs, small ones, that should have warned me. She asked about my family too often. She wanted to know about my brother before she wanted to know about my favorite book or childhood dream. When I spoke of him, her eyes gleamed with a curiosity that went deeper than polite interest. She smiled when I described his success. She laughed a little too warmly when I told her stories of his arrogance. At first, I convinced myself it was just fascination. People always found him fascinating. But then I noticed how she leaned forward when he entered a room. How her laugh softened when he spoke. She liked the power dynamic. She liked the space between us, the older, wealthier, untouchable brother, and me, the one who desperately wanted to be loved. To her, it must have felt like standing in the center of a storm, knowing whichever way the wind blew, she'd still be carried higher. Still, I clung to her. She was validation I'd been denied my whole life. Every kiss, every hand squeezed under the table, every time she whispered my name in the dark, it all felt like proof that maybe I wasn't invisible. Maybe I could win, just once. But the mirror told the truth. It always did. One night, after that party at my brother's penthouse, I came home alone. She had stayed behind, claiming exhaustion, but something gnawed at me. My apartment was silent, the kind of silence that amplifies every thought until it screams. I wandered to the bathroom, turned on the light, and caught my reflection. The mirror was cruel. My eyes were bloodshot, my face pale, a crack in the armor I'd been trying to polish for her. I imagined his reflection beside mine, perfect posture, perfect smile, the kind of man who never had to wonder if he was enough. My fist twitched, tempted to shatter the glass just to stop seeing what I already knew. That's when I saw it. Her purse. She had left it on the counter. I don't know why I opened it, curiosity, paranoia, instinct. Inside, tucked between a compact and a lipstick, was a small stack of photographs. At first, I smiled. Maybe they were me. Maybe she kept them close the way I kept her messages saved on my phone. But when I pulled them out, my stomach turned to ice. There she was, her smile unmistakable, her dress familiar, but she wasn't with me. She was with him. My brother. The photo was time-stamped a full month before the night we met. Before she ever told me she loved me. Before she ever touched me like I mattered. I felt the room tilt, the mirror behind me stretching and warping, reflecting a stranger's face. My hands trembled so violently I dropped the photo, but it didn't matter. The image was already burned into me. She hadn't just betrayed me. She had never been mine to begin with. The photographs didn't just wound me, they hollowed me out. For hours that night, I sat on the bathroom floor, the photos spread around me like shards of broken glass. Her arms around him, his hand cupping her face. Smiles that looked rehearsed, as if they knew I'd one day see them. I stared until my vision blurred, then forced myself to look again, hoping the images might rearrange themselves into something innocent. They never did. Sleep became impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them together. Her lipstick smeared across his jaw, his smirk pressed against her ear. I would jolt awake drenched in sweat, shaking, reaching for my phone to scroll through her messages. She told me she loved me. She told me I was different. I read those words over and over, until my hands trembled too violently to keep holding the screen. Different. That was her favorite word. She used it to make me believe I had something he didn't. But what did different mean? Did it mean lesser, like my brother had always claimed? Paranoia turned my body against me. Some nights, bile rose so hard in my throat I stumbled to the sink and vomited, gripping the porcelain until my knuckles burned. The taste lingered even after brushing my teeth raw. That was what loving her had become, a bitter aftertaste I couldn't wash away. And still, I couldn't let her go. I confronted her once, timidly, circling around the truth like a coward. She laughed, kissed me, told me I was imagining things. "You think too much," she whispered. Her hands smoothed my chest, her perfume dizzying, her eyes soft enough to blur the edges of my doubt. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to erase the photographs from my memory. But then came the little cuts. My brother's sly comments during family dinners, always disguised as jokes. "You've done well for yourself," he'd say, clinking his champagne glass, considering. Considering what? I asked once. Considering you. Everyone laughed, even her. She laughed as if the insult was harmless. As if it didn't echo every insecurity I'd carried since childhood. He was flaunting his superiority, weaving it into the air like secondhand smoke. I couldn't stop breathing. Meanwhile, my apartment grew smaller, dingier. Cracks in the paint, a leaky faucet, neighbors screaming through thin walls. I'd sit at my rickety kitchen table, scrolling through pictures of their nights out, lavish dinners in rooftop restaurants, expensive wines, designer clothes. She stood beside him in those photos, her posture perfect, her smile brighter than the bulb strung across the skyline behind them. My chest ached with shame. I was the man she lowered herself to. He was the man she rose toward. One night, after hours of torturing myself with their images, I finally lost control. I grabbed the framed picture of us from my nightstand, the one where she leaned into me, her head tilted just enough to suggest tenderness, and hurled it against the wall. The glass shattered in a shriek of splinters, scattering across the floor like the pieces of me she'd carved away. The photo slipped free, curling slightly at the edges. Even then, even in destruction, she looked beautiful. I hated her for it. I hated him more. But hate wasn't enough. Hate was useless if it stayed locked inside me. The breaking point came when I stumbled onto something I wasn't supposed to see. It was late, long past midnight, and she was asleep beside me. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. Normally, I wouldn't dare look. But the vibration was steady, insistent, as if the message itself was demanding my attention. I picked it up. The thread wasn't new, it stretched back weeks. Messages between her and my brother, hidden under a name I didn't recognize. I scrolled, stomach twisting tighter with every line. They weren't just mocking me. They weren't just sneaking behind my back for pleasure. They had plans. Once he's out of the picture, my brother had written, the inheritance will be cleaner. Father will see we're the stronger pair. Her reply, he'll never see it coming. He's too busy believing in us. The words blurred as tears burned my eyes. They weren't just betraying me with their bodies. They were conspiring against me, using my heart as a pawn in some calculated scheme to erase me from the family entirely. It wasn't only about love. It was about money. Power. Status. The things he'd always had, the things I'd never touched. And she was willing to play whichever role secured her place at his side. I dropped the phone as if it had scorched me. My chest heaved, my vision spun, and for a moment I thought I might collapse. I stumbled into the kitchen, clutching the counter for balance, my breath ragged. The betrayal was deeper than I'd imagined. It wasn't just that she chose my brother over me. It was that together, they were choosing to erase me completely. I stopped pretending grief would heal me. Grief was a slow-acting poison, strategy was the antidote. One night, after the vomiting fits and the sleepless scroll through messages, I dug out an old notebook I'd kept for stupid things, ideas for stories, grocery lists, a half-finished poem, and turned it into something else. I call it the ledger now, though at first it was just a place to get the rage out. Pages that had once held jokes filled with plans. The mirror on my wall watched me as I wrote, and for the first time the reflection didn't make me smaller. It made me deliberate. I knew I couldn't buy my way back into power. I didn't have his easy access to cash, his network, his silver tongue. All I had was a steady job, a bruised ego, and the kind of patience that comes from being underestimated your whole life. That last one, I decided, could be weaponized. My first task was reconnaissance. I became a quiet predator in their orbit. I went through social feeds with the clinical focus of someone cataloging evidence, names of friends who liked the same photo, preferred restaurants, the dry cleaner they favored, the charity gala my brother always posted from. I dug up articles about his company, announcements, praise pieces, throwaway mentions in business blogs. I printed what I could. I annotated. I assigned risk values next to each name: loyalty, gullibility, media exposure. Pages in my ledger are populated with circles, arrows, and the tiny, ruthless logic of someone building a mousetrap. From conversations with old classmates and the labors of Google, nothing romanticized, just ordinary sleuthing. I learned two things that mattered. 1. My brother's business had seams. There were partners who never quite saw eye to eye with him, a subcontractor who'd been paid late, a shell company listed on a filing from 3 years back that seemed to exist only on paper. 2. She loved the lifestyle. Her texts were petty, colorful lists of bags she wanted, salons she preferred, cocktails she liked. Where my emotions had made her a person, the ledger reduced her to a pattern: appetite, appetite, appetite. I didn't write a manifesto. I wrote small, surgical operations. Operation 1, Seed Doubt. I wrote anonymous notes, short, precise, left where her friends might find them. A postcard slipped into a clutch with the line, "Does he really love you, or the idea of you beside him?" A single email sent to a friend with a blurry screenshot of a whispered conversation I'd overheard in the penthouse lobby, no names, just enough to plant the thought. I learned how quickly a doubt germinates when soil is already fertile. Operation 2, Test his ego. My brother fed on admiration. I fed him flattery, and signed, public. I started a fake social account with a neutral, admiring tone and began commenting on articles about him, stoking the idealized image. It wasn't sabotage in the explosive sense, it was subtle, making him more visible in places where slips would be noticed. Pride makes people careless. Careless made him human. Operation 3, Fracture her circle. I sent a text, an anonymous tip, to a woman who'd been her friend for years: "He's not what he seems. Ask him about 2018. The message stirred the friend enough to pry. People who love luxury protect it fiercely, they also gossip to reassure themselves they're not fools. The friend started asking questions. Her questions leaked. Every small move lived in the ledger. I dated them, scored them, and tracked responses like a scientist tracking reactions. I wasn't reckless. I timed everything to the cadence of their lives: a gala, a lunch, a board meeting. I used public avenues. Whispered comments at a bar, a ripped receipt left near a valet stand, a carefully misdirected voicemail. None of it was complicated. It was meticulous. Precision instead of money. The ledger became a map of leverage points: a broker who hated my brother's decisions, a contractor who'd been stiffed, a woman in her circle who'd recently been passed over for an event. I sketched out sequences where one small nudge would produce a cascade. Humans are predictable when their vanity is bruised or their wallet is threatened. I built dominoes. At night, I rehearsed conversations in the mirror. I practiced the voice I'd use if confronted, cool, almost bored. It was crucial not to look like someone seeking vengeance. Vengeance screams. Strategy is calm. Strategy keeps receipts. I also kept a more private section in the ledger, what I wanted from all this besides retribution. Not money. Not his place at the table. I wanted to unmake the assumption that I was less. I wanted the mirror to stop whispering his silhouette across my face. I wanted evidence, not certainty, because certainty was what would let me sleep. Then, while rifling through a box of old tapes and junk in the attic one Sunday, an impulsive move born from insomnia, I found something I had buried along with other youth, a voice recorder my father used to rant into when the house got too quiet. He had recorded late complaints about the business, about promises made and broken. I'd kept the device because it was small and because the static-laced recordings felt like relics of a safer ignorance. I was idly pressing play, listening to white noise and the muffled sound of my father's voice, when another voice cut through, sharp, cruel, younger. It was my brother. He was laughing about a deal, boasting in the way men with something to hide boast. His words trembled with casual contempt. He described a maneuver. Obscure accounts, offshore partners, the kind of legal-sounding euphemisms that sit on the edge of illegality. He joked about making, and my father's name followed in a way that turned the whole thing filthy. I rewound again. The hairs on my arms lifted. I let the words sink in like a cold hand. This tape was more than gossip or anger. It was the kind of thing men in suits deny until subpoenas arrive. It was a key, thick with rust, that could unlock the right door if turned correctly. I placed the recorder on the ledger's last clean page, like a period at the end of a sentence I'd been too scared to write. The recording changed everything. All my little operations were scaffolding now, not ends in themselves. I could be patient and wait for the scaffold to bring the house down, or I could cut a beam and watch the structure he'd built collapse. I closed the ledger and felt, for the first time in months, a different kind of calm. Hate had walked me to a quiet place and left a map in my hands. But maps need turning. Plans need execution. I had a recording that could ruin him if I used it right, but using it meant choosing between exposure and annihilation. The ledger lay open, the tape hummed in my palm. I knew the choice I wanted to make, but I also knew the unknowns that came with it. I jotted one final line into the journal before the ink could blur: if I pull this, everyone will watch. Decide whether you want him ruined or you want to be free. The next step felt like stepping off a ledge. I looked at myself in the mirror and didn't flinch. The reflection returned the stare. The ledger closed. The recorder fit like a weight in my pocket, heavy, inevitable. They say revenge tastes sweet. Mine tasted of smoke and metal and the cheap champagne my brother always drank to celebrate victories that had nothing to do with me. Stage 1 was the whisper. I didn't need drama. I needed certainty implanted where it would grow. I chose the family dinner because that table was a living memory of everything he'd taken. My place, my childhood applause, my father's softened smile when my brother told a story. The penthouse felt different in daylight, less like a party and more like a courtroom. I arrived with a small envelope in my coat pocket and a calm face I'd practiced in the mirror. Inside the envelope, a single photograph, the one I'd found in her purse, printed in glossy black and white. I also had a copy of the text thread between them, cleaned up and printed, with the damning line circled in red: once he's out of the picture, the inheritance will be cleaner. Everything else was a breadcrumb trail I'd already scattered, a text here, an anonymous tip there, so that when the seed took, it would look like weeds growing naturally, not something I'd planted. Conversation lilted around the table: news, investments, the school fund my brother pretended to care about. My hand hovered just above the envelope. When the moment came, it was small and precise. I nudged the envelope with my knee toward my mother's place setting, where she read whatever she could like a liturgist. She palmed the card and unfolded it. Her smile faltered. She squinted. Then her eyes moved to me, then to my brother. I didn't speak. I watched the effect. Faces shifted. The air in the room changed pitch. My brother's laugh, which usually filled the room like warm light, thinned into something brittle. My mother began, voice small. My brother's hand went to the photograph before she finished, fingers grazing the glossy paper as if to steady it and the world at the same time. His jaw tightened. He tried to laugh it off, it's old, come on, but the seed had sprouted. A cousin mouthed the date on the photo. Someone else mentioned the text they'd seen scrolling on a waiter's phone days before. I kept my face blank, letting the rumor do the work I couldn't have done with shouting. The humiliation wasn't loud. It was a slow, quiet erosion. My brother's charming mask slipped in a dozen tiny ways that evening, a curt answer to a gratitude, an eye that avoided my mother's question, a smile that froze too long. He blamed the picture on an innocent meeting, suggesting a misunderstanding. His arrogance turned into explanations, too many to be credible. That was the point. People notice cracks, and they start to look for more. Stage 2 required patience and a colder hand. The recording sat heavy in my jacket when I left the dinner. I took it to a reporter I'd found months earlier, a freelance investigative journalist who'd written a piece on corporate opacity and had a reputation for liking inconvenient truths. I didn't go as a victim. I went as an anonymous source with a file and a narrative that fit the evidence I'd already staged. The tape, the emails, the printouts. I signed nothing. I met in a diner, slid the recorder across a scarred table, and walked away with the knowledge that someone with a subscription list and a conscience would do what I couldn't, turn suspicion into inquiry. Within days, auditors knocked at the company doors. Regulators sent polite, terrifying letters. My brother's board members started taking calls that ended with the phrase, "We need to speak." The press, hungry, professional, relentless, began to sketch the outlines of financial trickery into headlines. It was as if a once immaculate suit had been slashed at the seams, you couldn't put it back together cleanly. Stage 3 moved quieter and uglier. I began to feed the social machine with the other evidence I'd collected, the compromising photos, not violent nor obscene, but intimate enough to be scandalous in his world. I sent them to the right inboxes, a charity organizer, a club manager who'd hosted them, certain women in her circle who liked to be the first to know. The goal wasn't to destroy her life with gore, it was to make her party invitations thin, her bookings evaporate, her brand become a liability. Luxury circles protect their reputations from messy attachments because reputations equal invitations, and invitations equal survival. I burned the last love letter between us in my sink one night with a match. It fed the flame quietly, the words curled black and collapsed, and I watched the smoke wind its way up the vent. It felt ceremonial, an ending I'd postponed while I plotted. The ash scattered in the drain like the remains of a promise. I rejoiced at it, briefly, like a child delighted at a broken toy. Then I woke the next morning with my mouth tasting of smoke and a hollow feeling low in my chest. At first, the plans worked like clockwork. Each stage collapsed into the next. He lost a key client. One of his partners resigned under personal reasons. Her bookings dwindled. Invitations stopped arriving. She left parties early and texted me, once, asking if we could talk. She sounded scared, authentic for the first time. That fear tugged something in me that, for a moment, resembled pity. I told myself that was gone, I told myself there was only justice. Then the chaos I predicted turned feral. My brother lashed outward, the way wounded predators do. He tried to corral the narrative, to blame her publicly for the scandal, painted her as the manipulative interloper who'd seduced him for his name. He used his remaining charm to recruit sympathizers, telling close friends that she'd deceived him. she, cornered and terrified, made a different choice. In desperation, she handed some documents to the reporter, emails proving she'd been promised security, access, and even legal counsel in exchange for playing along. She'd been less a partner and more an accessory. She betrayed him in the only way she could to save herself, by offering up the breadcrumb trail that connected him to the darker corners of his own deals. They turned on each other like animals who'd used the same hand to feed themselves. The rancor was delicious to watch from a distance. He was accused. She confessed selectively. They traded allegations across press releases and private briefings. I felt the satisfying spike of power each time my name wasn't in the paper, but their faces were. They became smaller under the lens. They clawed and scraped. Their relationship imploded on live feeds and in whispered boardroom conversations. Every victory left a scratch. When a judge's gag order temporarily slowed the public slew of accusations, I felt a cold grief I hadn't named. I'd wanted him ruined, not annihilated. I wanted to stand taller. Instead, I felt the ground move under everyone we'd known. And then, the final twist before the trap closed. A week after the first hearings began, my brother sent an invitation. It was formal, a dinner, this time in a low-profile restaurant, to clear the air, he said. He framed it as an olive branch. The board wanted family unity. My mother begged me to go. My phone filled with messages, please, for family. It felt calculated. I almost didn't accept it. Old instincts told me to stay away from his pull. But the ledger sat on my desk, open to the page where I jotted my final aim, not revenge for revenge's sake, but to make them regret. Make them watch. I wanted to see his face when the last domino fell. I wanted to feel the room tilt with the truth. I accepted. Only later did I learn the invitation wasn't a call for reconciliation. It was a stage. He'd called every journalist who'd been patient enough to wait. He'd fed them a narrative, one that would make me look like a meddling brother whose jealousy had turned into criminality. He had resources I'd never imagined. He'd intended to lure us both into a public spectacle, a final performance where they would either humiliate me into silence or provide him with the evidence he needed to push me out for good. He'd set the stage. And somewhere in the dark, the audience was already taking its seats. The night of the dinner ended not as he planned, but as I did. The journalists he'd summoned didn't leave with a story of my jealousy, they left with a recording. His voice, laughing about offshore accounts, about numbers shuffled like a card trick. I didn't need to argue. I only needed to watch their faces while they listened. Within weeks, the empire collapsed. The board expelled him. Creditors circled like vultures, snapping at the last clean bones of his company. The penthouse emptied, paintings sold, furniture repossessed, lights flickering out one by one. He went from toast of the city to a footnote, a warning whispered in investor circles. Bankrupt. Disgraced. She didn't fare better. When the photos surfaced, when the texts leaked, when whispers spread that she had betrayed him to save herself, her name curdled. Invitations stopped coming. The friends she'd cultivated like expensive orchids dropped her with practiced ease. She lingered in cheaper bars, her dresses the same but the backdrop different. Neon instead of chandeliers, laughter that cut instead of charmed. She was abandoned, socially ruined. Revenge complete. And yet, it didn't feel like triumph. I'd imagined a high, a victorious rush when they finally fell. Instead, I felt quiet. The kind of quiet that arrives after a storm levels a house. You stand in the rubble, intact, but something in you aches at the emptiness. One morning, I caught myself in the mirror again. For months, I'd avoided it. The reflection had always been my brother's stage. But this time, when I looked, he wasn't there. No shadow over my shoulder, no comparison lurking at the edge of my jawline. Just me. Pale, tired, but unchained. For a long time I stared, waiting for the whisper of inadequacy to creep back. It didn't. The mirror belonged to me now. That was the growth I hadn't planned for, realizing I didn't need their approval. Not his, not hers. I could live without being chosen. Because in the end, I had chosen myself. Through pain, through fury, through fire. The scars would never vanish, but they were proof I'd survived something that once would have broken me. Sometimes, in the dark, I still hear her laugh. Sometimes I remember his smirk, the tilt of his head, the way they looked at each other when they thought I wasn't watching. Those memories don't sting anymore, they echo. Ghosts in an empty hall. I don't chase them. I don't fear them. They are reminders of what I endured, and what I became. I keep the ledger locked away. Not because I need it, but because it deserves a coffin. The last page holds the line I wrote before everything tipped: decide whether you want him ruined or you want to be free. I realize now I wanted both. I got both. Freedom tastes less like sweetness, more like iron, but it is still freedom. I stepped out of their world, no longer orbiting his wealth or her beauty. My steps felt lighter. My reflection finally walked in rhythm with me. And if anyone asks, if anyone ever wonders what happened between us, I have only one line, the one that closes the story, sharp and final as glass breaking. She chose my brother once, but in the end, they both chose regret.